Good afternoon again. I'm very excited to be here. And what I would like to talk to you about today is about a paradox embedded in the theme of today's event. And if it is true that to implement SDGs, we have to promote public access to information, I can see a small little problem there. What I'm actually concerned about is when we actually set up the public access to information as an end goal in and of itself, because it freezes our capacity to assess and to also reflect upon the use of information. And rather, what we should focus on is on the intent, so how one means to use this information, and also on its consequences. And let me give you one example. We all know that a good teacher with a bad textbook can do wonders compared to a bad teacher with a very good textbook. And what I'm trying to get at is for all of us to ponder on the following question. Are the problems that we're facing today caused by a lack of access to information, or are we simply lacking the desire or the will to make the sacrifices necessary to solve these problems? My field of practice, architecture in developing context, aims at imagining buildings that maximize social impact, inclusion, and environmental conservation. And to do that, it has to mobilize public will, government support, and a lot of other resources. And because all of these aspects have to coexist and actually happen for a long time until a building gets complete, what's very sad is that the ratio between built and unbuilt projects is depressingly low. And the ratio between a good and bad project is even the more so. So, the fact that so many of these projects fail is not caused by a lack of access to information, but rather because the intent and the end goal of this project were not clearly set up from the very start of it. And also because very often they did not include all of the voices of the different stakeholders and community, and that they did not include as well the dimensions that are social, economic, and environmental of the site of a project. And unfortunately, I learned this the hard way, and I will share that with you through two projects that I've worked on for the past decade in the south of Morocco. So those two projects are set up in the oasis of Hamid El Ghizlan that's actually localized in the Dra River Valley that you can see here, which is a UNESCO Man and Biosphere Reserve that has been named since 2000, and it is composed of 300 kilometers long date palm groves, and that are scattered with oases and rammed earth villages called the Kasbahs. And in the past, the oases used to be an exemplary model of sustainable living environments. And the subsistence of the oasis relied on a very fine balance between the built environment, the natural environment, and man. So just, kind of to shed some light on a myth that probably you all have, an oasis is not a lush garden that just happens by magic in the middle of sand dunes. Actually, an oasis is a man-produced landscape that requires a lot of hard work and a lot of knowledge for it to exist in the desert. And actually, one of the main components of the oasis is the Kasbah. And it's also built in a very intelligent manner. The buildings are very tightly placed together, and they are built with very thick rammed earth walls, and that are also very tall, so that the streets are in shade for the entire period of the day. And the temperature inside the Kasbah is usually 10 degrees lower than the temperature outside. And for the oasis, it is planted according to a very smart system that is three-tiered, that is composed of palm trees, fruit trees, and wheat and vegetables on the lower level. And these three systems of plants work together to create a microclimate where plants can thrive. And finally, water, which is the most precious natural resource in a desert. It is collected and managed collectively by the community and distributed in a equitable manner among the families. And until today, I can tell you that I cannot cease to be amazed by how well this system used to function, where actually humans, natural environment, and also natural resources work hand in hand to survive in the middle of a very harsh environment. Unfortunately, something has been happening all throughout the Dra Valley. The oasis, the fragile balance of the oasis has been broken. And this is due to a series of causes. Of course, climate change, many droughts, the fact that the borders has been closed, the nomadic lifestyle and caravan routes have ended. All those have caused the population of the oasis to migrate towards city center looking for work. And very sadly, one of the consequences that agriculture has been abandoned. And it was the roots of the plants of agriculture that retained the soil. Without that, sand dunes that you can see here advance within the oasis and literally devour its land. Similarly, the Casbah buildings, which I just showed you before, have also been abandoned. And without maintenance, as soon as it rained, they melt away. And also, they were also abandoned by the population which remained behind, because they think that those buildings are backward. And as soon as they have the means to move, they would go to live in concrete homes that you can see here. So the oases today, throughout the Dra Valley, are starting to look like this. Just concrete-clad buildings that are built right next to paved roads. And what is actually, sorry, moved too fast. And actually what's quite sad is that the oasis can only survive thanks to remittances, but also to tourism. But sadly, this is the image I wanted to show you, it's a form of tourism that's very exploitative and predatory, since it uses most of the resources, the scarce resources of the oasis, like you can see here, water in these huge swimming pools. So with the disappearance of the oasis as a productive landscape and its Casbah buildings, it is an entire set of tradition and culture that is on the verge of completely disappearing. And in the case of Hamid al-Ghizlan, the oasis where I've been working, the population was very much aware of this looming danger, but they didn't know what could be a possible alternative for their built environment. And this is where I come into play. About 10 years ago, I started working with two community leaders, the Sbahi brothers, who lead two very nice NGOs called Targat and Zaila, that work on culture, the preservation of culture, and also environmental awareness. And what we had set up to do is to think of a pilot project that can demonstrate that architecture could possibly be reimagined to bridge between the past, the present, and the future, and so that it could actually ensure that the oasis, instead of completely vanishing, could mutate. And so what we started by doing first is to set up a team of international experts and local people. And one of our first tasks was to do a mapping of the local, members of the community. And we actually spoke to every single person in the small little villages that are composed the oasis. And what we've done is that we asked them very clearly what could be their potential skills that they could bring in to this project. And I'm not just speaking about skills to construct, but it could be anything, like skills about craft and so forth. And one of the goals that we had was also to make this mapping in a way legible for the population, since half of them could not read or write. And after 1 year of consultation, we actually realized that this pilot project should be an ecotourism project, because tourism was actually the most devastating force in the oasis. And therefore, we again started looking at vernacular architecture, local craft, and working in between Mohammed and the University of Toronto, where I teach. We developed some very interesting solutions. And one of the first solutions was a system of rammed earth walls that's actually reinforced, and also with the type of finish that limits maintenance, so that when it rains, you don't need to put a layer of earth on it each time, and also it could be built much faster. And another system we worked on is how could we collect every single drop of water that lands on our site, and how can we recycle it as many time as possible, so that no single drop of water is wasted. Another thing we worked on is a new type of anti-desertification system. So we looked at all of the systems that already exist, and we came up with a hybrid system that combines the tamarix tree, which is the best tree that could retain soil and therefore sand dune, a slanted rammed earth wall, which protects the tree against strong winds, and finally a palm tree leaves grid that would further help stabilize the sand dunes. Who has a phone ringing? And finally, after 4 years of effort, we came up with a scheme that you could see here, which really, in a very seamless way, architecture and landscape are integrated together, so that they could form a barrier against the advancement of sand dunes. So even before the project was complete, we received several architectural awards. And then we were very surprised to see that on the ground, the project failed, horribly failed. We actually were very surprised to see that the population that helped us design the project from the bottom up rejected it. And we were wondering why. And it took us a while to actually understand why we completely missed the boat. Well, the local population could not actually voice during our meetings that the fact that the project was a tourism project was an issue, because tourism was still seen as the best way to actually get money to flow back into the oasis, but it was still seen as an exploitative system, and the project was perceived as being a project for foreigners, not for the local population. And it actually took two outsiders, so somebody from the Playing for Change Foundation, who was just on holiday in this oasis, and a Peace Corps volunteer who came to see us and actually showed us what was something that was so obvious, and the solution to our project was actually right below our eyes. And it was the fact that in the oasis of Mohammed, 50% of the population is under 18. And in a way, we completely missed the right type of stakeholders. In all of the meetings we were having this past 5 years, we never once had a child. We had a lot of women, because men actually had left the oasis, but we never had kids. And kids in this oasis have no creative outlet whatsoever. And since 2009, with one internet connection, with one electric guitar, they have started learning desert blues, which is a type of music that mixes Saharan music with blues. And they've been actually, like having a lot of fun, and they actually also have a band that just toured in Holland this past June. And so we set up again to work. We went back to our drawing boards, and we used all of the information that we gathered before. And this time, we included kids in all of our meetings, of course. And we redesigned the project on the same site, using the same information and the same innovations, that we created a music school, which we called Jodor Sahara, the roots of the Sahara. And I'm very pleased to say that the community is excited that funding agencies have started to help us. Among them, I would cite the US State Department and the Playing for Change Foundation. But also, what's mostly exciting is that we're going to have our first set of classes starting this October. But for the building itself, we're going to need to wait for the end of the fundraising campaign. And one last thought before I leave, I know that I went over time, is that I hope that it's clear to you that, giving access to information to people to allow them to have more informed choices is important, but for me it's only the beginning. And that what's actually important is how we use this information. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.